The parent-teacher meeting was supposed to be routine. Single father, shy daughter, academic concerns. But when Mr. Thompson saw the military photograph fall from the man's wallet, he realized he was talking to the Navy SEAL who'd saved his son's life in Afghanistan. 12 years of searching, one school meeting, everything connected. Welcome to the last salute. That quiet single father is actually Chief Petty Officer David "Ghost" Miller, former SEAL Team 6 operator who disappeared after a classified mission that teacher Mr. Thompson's son barely survived. If you want to see how a parent conference becomes a hero's reunion, smash that subscribe button right now, because Mr. Thompson has been looking for the SEAL who carried his wounded son to safety for 12 years. And he's about to discover that his daughter's struggling classmate is the hero's child, living quietly in his own school district. What city are you watching from? This classroom revelation is about to show why some heroes hide in plain sight. Lincoln Elementary School, Room 15. 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon where parent-teacher conferences moved through scheduled appointments with the methodical efficiency of an educational system designed to address problems, not understand their deeper causes. David Miller sat uncomfortably in a child-sized plastic chair, his large frame clearly not designed for elementary school furniture. At 42 years old, David carried himself with the quiet discipline that came from military training he couldn't completely abandon, even in civilian settings. Single father for 6 years now, David had learned to navigate parent-teacher conferences, school events, and educational challenges that felt more complex than some of the missions he'd completed during his military career. Being responsible for 8-year-old Sarah's academic and emotional development was the most important operation he'd ever undertaken. Sarah Miller was struggling in 3rd grade. Not because she wasn't intelligent. David knew his daughter was exceptionally bright, but because she was dealing with challenges that most 8-year-olds never faced. Social anxiety, difficulty making friends, and behavioral issues that her teacher attributed to adjustment problems from her parents' divorce. What Sarah's teacher didn't know was that there had been no divorce. Sarah's mother had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving David to raise their daughter alone while dealing with his own invisible wounds from military service that had ended under circumstances he'd never discussed with anyone. David had been Chief Petty Officer David "Ghost" Miller, SEAL Team 6. 12 years of special operations in places that didn't officially exist, conducting missions that were classified at levels most military personnel never encountered. His specialty had been rescue operations, extracting high-value targets, wounded personnel, and hostages from situations where conventional forces couldn't operate. David's military career had ended abruptly in Afghanistan, during a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. His team had been providing security for a forward operating base when they'd come under sustained enemy attack. Multiple casualties, compromised positions, and a rescue operation that had required David to make choices that saved lives, but cost him his peace of mind. David had successfully evacuated 17 wounded soldiers under hostile fire conditions, including carrying a critically injured young soldier to safety, while taking enemy fire from 3 different positions. The operation had been successful. Everyone had made it home alive. But David had been wounded both physically and psychologically in ways that ended his military career. Medical discharge with full honors, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Navy Cross. Commendations that recognized his heroism but couldn't repair the psychological damage that made continued military service impossible. David had moved to this small town to rebuild his life with his wife and daughter, a place where nobody knew about his military service, where he could raise Sarah away from the memories and pressures that came with being a decorated war hero, a place where he could be just another father trying to provide stability for his child. But David's wife's death had shattered the quiet life they'd built. Suddenly, he was a single father dealing with his own PTSD while trying to help Sarah process grief and loss that no child should have to understand. Tonight's parent-teacher conference was about Sarah's recent behavioral changes. Withdrawal from social activities, declining academic performance, and emotional outbursts that suggested deeper problems than normal childhood adjustment issues. If you're sensing this parent conference is about to reveal hidden depths, hit that subscribe button now, Because when a teacher meets a hero he's been searching for, you're about to see why some connections transcend classrooms. Robert Thompson had been teaching third grade at Lincoln Elementary for 22 years. At 54 years old, he'd worked with thousands of children and hundreds of families, developing an intuitive understanding of which students needed extra attention and which parents were dealing with challenges beyond normal family dynamics. Sarah Miller had been concerning him since the beginning of the school year. Clearly intelligent, but socially withdrawn and emotionally fragile in ways that suggested trauma or significant family stress. Her academic work was excellent when she focused, but she frequently seemed distracted by concerns that most 8-year-olds never carried. Mr. Thompson had requested this conference because he suspected that Sarah's struggles were connected to family circumstances that might be addressable with proper support and resources. Single-parent households faced unique challenges, and he'd learned that early intervention could prevent academic and social problems from becoming permanent obstacles. But Mr. Thompson also carried his own emotional burden that influenced his dedication to military families. His son Michael had served in Afghanistan as an army medic and had been severely wounded during a Taliban attack on his forward operating base. Michael had survived, but his recovery had required months of medical treatment and years of psychological rehabilitation. Michael had told his father about the Navy SEAL who'd carried him to safety during the attack, a special operations soldier who'd exposed himself to enemy fire repeatedly to evacuate wounded personnel, including Michael, who would have died without immediate medical evacuation. Mr. Thompson had never learned the SEAL's name or unit designation. Military operational security had classified the details of the mission, and Michael's injuries had been so severe that his memories of the rescue were fragmented and unclear. But Mr. Thompson knew that somewhere, a Navy SEAL had risked his life to save his son. For 12 years, he'd wondered about that unknown hero, hoping someday to express gratitude that could never adequately repay such a debt. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Thompson began as David settled into the uncomfortable chair, "thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss Sarah's recent academic performance and some behavioral concerns we've observed." David listened attentively as Mr. Thompson described Sarah's struggles with social interaction, her occasional emotional outbursts, and her tendency to withdraw during group activities. "Has Sarah experienced any significant changes at home?" Mr. Thompson asked. "Sometimes children's school behavior reflects family stressors that we can address with appropriate support." David hesitated. He'd learned to be careful about sharing personal information, especially details about his military background that might create unwanted attention or sympathy. "Sarah's mother died 2 years ago," David said quietly. "We're both still adjusting to life as a single-parent household." Mr. Thompson's expression immediately softened with understanding and sympathy. He'd worked with many families dealing with loss, and he recognized the particular challenges faced by children processing parental death. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Mr. Thompson said. "That explains some of Sarah's behavioral patterns. Grief processing in children often manifests as social withdrawal and emotional regulation difficulties." As they discussed Sarah's academic needs and potential support strategies, David reached for his wallet to show Mr. Thompson Sarah's recent report card from their previous school. The wallet was worn leather, clearly military issued, and when David opened it, a small photograph fell onto the desk. Mr. Thompson automatically reached to pick up the photograph, intending to hand it back to David. But when he saw the image, his hand froze. The photograph showed a group of Navy SEALs in full combat gear, standing in front of a military helicopter in what was clearly an Afghan desert landscape. The men's faces were partially obscured by tactical equipment, but their unit insignia was clearly visible. SEAL Team 6, Afghanistan deployment, the same unit and time frame as the mission where Michael had been wounded and rescued. Mr. Thompson looked at the photograph, then at David, then back at the photograph. One of the SEALs in the image had the same build, same posture, same facial structure as the man sitting across from him. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Thompson said slowly, "were you deployed to Afghanistan with SEAL Team 6? David's expression immediately became guarded. He'd spent 6 years avoiding discussions about his military service, especially with civilians who might not understand the complexity of his experiences. "I served in the Navy," David said carefully, "but I prefer not to discuss the details." Mr. Thompson's hands were shaking as he held the photograph. "Mr. Miller, I need to ask you something specific. Were you involved in operations at Forward Operating Base Chapman in 2012? David's face went pale. FOB Chapman had been the location of his final mission, the operation that had ended his military career and left him with invisible wounds that still affected his daily life. "Why are you asking?" David said quietly. Mr. Thompson felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized he might be looking at the man who'd saved his son's life. "My son Michael was an Army medic stationed at Chapman. He was wounded during a Taliban attack, and a Navy SEAL carried him to the evacuation helicopter." David stared at Mr. Thompson in stunned silence. He remembered that mission with painful clarity. The sustained enemy attack, the multiple casualties, the desperate evacuation under hostile fire conditions. He remembered carrying wounded soldiers to safety, including a young medic who'd been critically injured while treating other wounded personnel. "Michael Thompson?" David asked quietly. "Yes," Mr. Thompson whispered. "Michael Thompson, Army medic, 22 years old. Shrapnel wounds to his chest and legs." David closed his eyes as the memories flooded back. "I remember him. He was trying to treat other wounded soldiers even after he'd been hit. Refused evacuation until we'd secured all the other casualties." Mr. Thompson was crying now, in the middle of his classroom, as he realized he was sitting across from the man who'd made his family's continued existence possible. "Mr. Miller, Michael came home because of you. He recovered, completed medical school, and he's now a trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins. He has a wife, 2 children, and a career saving other people's lives." David listened in amazement as Mr. Thompson described his son's successful recovery and subsequent career. "Michael talks about the SEAL who saved him every Veterans Day. He spent 12 years wondering if you made it home safe, if you were okay, if there was any way to thank you. Are you ready to see 2 families connected by heroism? Subscribe and keep watching. This classroom revelation is about to show how one rescue mission created bonds that last generations." David was overwhelmed by the coincidence that had brought him face to face with the father of a soldier he'd rescued 12 years ago. "Mr. Thompson, I was just doing my job. Michael was a hero. He was treating wounded soldiers under fire. Any of us would have carried him to safety." "But you did carry him to safety," Mr. Thompson said, "and not just Michael. You evacuated 17 wounded soldiers that day. Michael told me about watching you run back into enemy fire repeatedly to bring people to the helicopter." Mr. Thompson explained how Michael's rescue and recovery had influenced his own dedication to helping children from military families. "After Michael came home, I started paying special attention to students whose parents had served. I wanted to make sure their children got the support they deserved." "I never knew you were a veteran," Mr. Thompson continued. "If I'd realized Sarah was the daughter of a decorated Navy SEAL, I would have approached her behavioral concerns very differently." David shook his head. "I don't want special treatment because of my service. Sarah's challenges aren't about my military background. They're about losing her mother and adjusting to our new life." But Mr. Thompson was beginning to understand that Sarah's struggles might be more complex than simple grief processing. "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, children of combat veterans often carry invisible burdens that civilian families don't understand. PTSD, deployment stress, and military trauma can affect entire families." David had never considered that his own psychological struggles might be affecting Sarah in ways he hadn't recognized. He'd been so focused on providing stability and normalcy that he hadn't acknowledged how his own invisible wounds might be impacting his daughter's emotional development. "Sarah has mentioned that you sometimes have bad dreams," Mr. Thompson said gently, "and she's expressed concern about your safety when she's not with you. Those are indicators of secondary trauma, children absorbing stress from parents who are dealing with combat-related psychological injuries." David realized that his attempts to shield Sarah from his PTSD symptoms had actually made her more anxious, not less. His hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, and emotional numbness were affecting his daughter in ways he'd never intended. "What can I do?" David asked. "How can I help her?" Mr. Thompson smiled. "The first step is recognizing that you're both dealing with challenges that require specialized support. There are resources for military families, programs for children of combat veterans, and therapeutic approaches that can help both of you." Mr. Thompson had extensive knowledge of veteran support services because of his experience with Michael's recovery. He'd learned about programs, resources, and therapeutic approaches that specifically addressed the needs of military families dealing with combat trauma. "There's a family support group for combat veterans that meets at the VA hospital," Mr. Thompson explained. "They have specific programs for children who are processing parental military trauma. Sarah could benefit from connecting with other kids who understand what she's experiencing." David had been avoiding VA services since his medical discharge, partly because of his own pride, and partly because engaging with veteran support systems felt like admitting that he couldn't handle civilian life independently. "I've been trying to handle everything on my own," David admitted. "I thought getting help would be admitting failure." "Michael felt the same way," Mr. Thompson said. "It took him 2 years to accept that asking for help was actually a sign of strength, not weakness. The same courage that made you a good SEAL will make you a good advocate for your daughter's needs." Mr. Thompson offered to personally connect David with resources that could help both him and Sarah. Family counseling, veteran support groups, and educational accommodations that could address Sarah's specific needs as the child of a combat veteran. "More importantly," Mr. Thompson said, "Michael has been looking for you for 12 years. He'd be honored to meet the man who saved his life, and I think you'd benefit from connecting with someone who understands both military service and the challenges of transitioning to civilian life." David agreed to consider these options, but more importantly, he'd learned that Sarah's struggles weren't a reflection of his failure as a father. They were the predictable result of trauma that could be addressed with appropriate support and understanding. If this father-teacher connection is touching your heart, subscribe to The Last Salute right now. We honor these family bonds every week. The conclusion will show how one rescue creates lasting relationships. 2 weeks later, David and Sarah attended their first family counseling session at the VA hospital. Sarah was nervous about meeting other children, but she was also curious about connecting with kids who might understand her experiences. Most importantly, Mr. Thompson arranged for David to meet his son Michael during Thanksgiving break. The reunion between the Navy SEAL and the Army medic he'd rescued 12 years earlier was emotional for both men, but it was also healing. Michael had spent years wondering if the SEAL who'd saved him had made it home safely. David had spent years wondering if the wounded soldiers he'd evacuated had recovered and built successful lives. Meeting each other provided closure that both men needed. "You gave me the chance to become a doctor," Michael told David. "Every life I save in the operating room is possible because you saved mine in Afghanistan." David realized that his rescue mission had created ripple effects that extended far beyond that single day in Afghanistan. Michael's medical career, Mr. Thompson's dedication to military families, and even Sarah's future opportunities were all connected to decisions David had made under fire 12 years earlier. Sarah's academic and social performance improved dramatically once she began receiving appropriate support for her specific needs as a military child. Understanding that her father was a hero, rather than just a man with problems, gave her a new perspective on their family circumstances. By the end of the school year, Sarah Miller had become one of the most confident and academically successful students in Mr. Thompson's class. Her behavioral concerns had been resolved through family counseling, peer support, and educational accommodations that addressed her unique needs. David had found purpose in his civilian life by becoming an advocate for veteran families in their school district. His experience with military service and single parenthood made him uniquely qualified to help other military families navigate educational and social challenges. Mr. Thompson had gained a new understanding of how military service affects entire families, not just the veterans themselves. His classroom became a model for supporting military children, and his approach was adopted throughout the school district. Michael Thompson maintained regular contact with David and Sarah, creating an extended family connection that provided ongoing support for both the veteran who'd saved his life and the daughter who was growing up in his shadow. And every Veterans Day, Sarah Miller stood proudly during her school's recognition ceremony, knowing that her father was the kind of hero other people told stories about, but also understanding that the most important thing about him wasn't his medals. It was his dedication to being the father she needed him to be. Because some rescues create bonds that last generations, some heroes are also fathers who need support. And sometimes the most important battles are fought in classrooms, counseling sessions, and family dinners where healing happens one conversation at a time. Before you go, if this father-daughter story moved you, subscribe to The Last Salute and hit that notification bell. Next week, the story of a hospital janitor whose cleaning cart hides medals that make surgeons stop and salute. Drop a comment about teachers or veterans who've impacted your family. Until next time, this is The Last Salute, honoring those who serve in combat and those who serve at home.